Most of the time, I work on equipment and sometimes they end up in my storage after they're fixed for some time, especially if it's the wrong season to sell them. When I do sell them, I don't ever expect to see them again. At least, that's my expectation, but in reality, things don't always work out that way and they do come back. So there's only one thing that I ask, and that's to not touch the piece of equipment, and I'll take care of it. However, that doesn't always happen, and I get someone's sloppy seconds. There's nothing wrong doing that, but sometimes it's more of a hassle than helpful. In today's video, we look at this Craftsman mower and a Troy-Bilt pressure washer, and the problem is that both have a minor issue, and I've been asked to look at them. However, one of them has already been looked at, and this is going to make things a little bit more interesting to fix. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower and pressure washer. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. Now, the first one I want to address is the mower, and that's because it's the most pressing. The issue with it is that the customer says there's a fuel leak from the tank. Now, after getting more information, it turns out they've only used it once, and they filled the tank all the way to the very top. The interesting part was they said it only leaked for a little bit, and then it stopped. Now, the leak didn't seem to keep them from using the mower because it looks like the tank is almost empty. Now, on this style of tank, if the bottom of the tank is wet, it means there's still several ounces in it, which I'll show you here in a bit. Since I've been told the tank does leak, I'm just going to remove it from the engine and inspect it. To be honest, taking off the tank, it doesn't take all that much time, but you need to use at least 4 different tools to do it. Now, on the newer style Briggs engine, it only takes half as many, which could save you a lot of time. Now, at this point, I had forgotten just how much fuel was left in the tank, so it kind of caught me off guard. Now, I can't let all this fuel spill on the mower and onto the ground, so I'll try and catch as much as I can. Now, this is the first time I've done it this way, so even I was quite surprised at how much fuel was still left in there. Now, even though it looks like it's empty, there's still yet some more fuel inside it, and to get the rest of it out, I'm going to carefully tilt the mower. Now, once I know it's mostly empty, I can then remove the last fastener that's hidden under the fuel tank. Now, when taking off that bolt, there's also a spacer that sits between the engine and the tank, so when reinstalling it, make sure you put it in the right location, otherwise the tank will sit crooked. After that, we should be able to remove the tank for an inspection. After looking at the seam on the tank, I don't see any obvious leaks. However, that's when I noticed this crack near the front of the tank, which is of course where the leak is coming from. Unfortunately, this crack is much bigger than I expected, so there's no saving it. I would like to try and fix it later on, but I'll have to leave that for a different video. The only way to solve our leak is to just replace the tank with another one. Luckily, having a couple of parts mowers around really helps out, and I quickly sourced this one. Now, I did look it over for any cracks, and I didn't see any, but I'm going to test it later on just to make sure. So why wouldn't I just test it now? And the answer is pretty simple. It just makes too much sense. I have been considering making a conversion kit for mowers to run on propane, and the reason is that it'll allow me to not waste my time trying to get a mower running just to find out that it's burning oil and smoking like a freight train. It'll also allow me to figure out if a mower runs, cuts, and if it has a working self-propel system as well. I'm also trying to find a way to run a 2-stroke engine using propane as well, and of course, if you didn't know, I'd have to find a way to spray a lubricant into the engine, otherwise it's not going to run for more than 10 or 20 minutes. If you have any ideas on how to do that, I'd like to hear about it. So I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, which is to fill the tank almost all the way to the top to see if there's any leaks from the tank. Now, this is about as much as I'm comfortable putting into the tank, and that's because if you put it all the way to the top, it could interfere with the venting system and cause the engine to stop a few minutes after starting it. So it's been a few minutes, and I don't see any fuel leaking from the tank, which is great news. Now, I'm going to drain the majority of the fuel out of it. I may have fixed the leak, but I'm not going to give it back to them with a full tank of gasoline. Now, don't worry, I can't siphon all of it out, so they're still going to get more gasoline back than when they gave it to me. As you can see, there's still some standing gasoline in the tank, which wasn't there when I got it, and since I've got some gasoline to spare and the grass in this area that I'm filming at is rather long, I guess I could try using the mower. Not surprisingly, a carb with a push-button primer can sometimes flood the engine, which is why it took a couple of pulls to start it. Also, the smoke from the engine is from the mower being tipped nose down while being lifted. This will cause the oil to move to the back of the piston and cause some of it to basically make its way past the rings and into the combustion chamber. Another reason why the tank could have been leaking is from the seam where both halves of the tank are joined together. However, I've only seen this happen once before, so it's about as rare as a crack in the tank, which doesn't happen very often either. So my question is, do you fill your tanks to the very top with gasoline? Personally, I do not, and I have a good reason why. A fuel can is meant to store fuel for some time, so it keeps it airtight, while a fuel tank is meant to hold fuel while in use and not meant for long-term storage. Now that the mower is done, we can move on to the pressure washer, and this one is a bit different and somewhat irritating. So this pressure washer belongs to a good friend of mine, and the story goes they pulled on the rope to try and start it, but the rope didn't wind back up and just stayed out, so obviously they couldn't get it started. They said it was working just fine, and the only issue was the pull rope. Nothing wrong so far, right? But this is when things get a little disappointing. Now, the plan was to take off the recoil and see what kind of damage there was, but come to find out, they had already done that. So what's wrong with that? Well, they had decided to throw away most of the components that came off the recoil and also lost the screws for the cover. What that means is that my options for fixing it have been greatly reduced or pretty much set by their decision to try and fix it on their own. So am I discouraging people from working on their own stuff? Absolutely not. I think it's a very smart choice. In fact, with the way the economy is going right now, it probably makes a lot of sense. It's just the way they went about it could have been a lot better. After taking off the cover, I realized what had happened. It looks like the retaining clip came off, which then dropped the guide plate and let all the pawls and springs fall out as well. Unfortunately, they decided to throw all those parts away, which means I can't even try and put them back together. So we had this issue before with an orange mower that someone gave away because it had a recoil issue. Now, if you watched that repair video, you'll know what the solution was. So my only choice was to replace the recoil with a new one, but there's a huge issue, which is part of the irritation I had with this whole situation. This is obviously not the correct recoil, and the reason is this model has not been made for a long time, which means the part is back ordered, or if I do find it, it's extremely expensive. Now the one I did buy will work, it's just not going to cover all of the engine, and it's obviously because it's a lot smaller than the original one. I'll put it on to show you what the difference is, but before I do that, I need to swap these wires for the on-off switch, which was replaced just recently. Now these wires can be installed on either post, but it would be better if the 90-degree connector was closer to the fuel tank. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get some comments about the rust on the flywheel and how it's going to affect the ignition system, but I'm not going to bother cleaning it just to prove my point that the air gap isn't affected by the rust and the engine is still going to start and run. So here's what it looks like with the original cover back on the engine, and as you can see, you can't see the engine at all. But once I swap them, you can see a lot more of it, which is not ideal, especially since there are some parts that really should be covered up for their protection. Now, the front of the engine is the most exposed part, and you can also see the linkages for the carb and also the thermostat that bypasses the choke system, but this is going to have to do for right now. I now have to install some hardware to secure it to the engine, but regular bolts won't do. Instead, I had to find a way to put a shoulder on the bolt to make up for the size of the opening in the plastic cover. To make it easier to install, do not tighten the bolts just yet until the last fastener has been installed. Now to make sure these bolts don't come loose, I'm also going to put some medium strength thread locker on them. After getting the fasteners tight, I'll then try out the recoil, and of course it works just like it's supposed to. However, it just doesn't look right. Of course, the best way to show how well it works, I might as well use the pressure washer to clean something. Now, I haven't used a pressure washer at all this whole year to clean anything, opting instead to wash stuff by hand. And this is what I'm going to clean, which has to be the worst looking mower I've ever seen. Of course, the reason it looks this bad is because the engine has a serious oil leak, but before I find the leak, I need to get as much of the old oil and dirt off of it. So as expected, the pressure washer works just fine even with the wrong recoil on it, and of course the benefit of just replacing the entire cover versus replacing all of the missing parts is that it takes any of the guesswork out of the equation for compatibility of aftermarket parts to the original one. I hate to say it, but using the pressure washer does save a tremendous amount of time, and I can get to fixing this mower a lot quicker. However, it's not perfect, and this one is going to require some sort of degreaser as well to get all of that tough grease off the metal. If you prefer to use a pressure washer instead of hand washing, I can certainly understand why in this case, but you do have to be very careful around certain areas, otherwise you could destroy stickers, blow away some of the paint, and even accidentally force water inside the engine. So in the end, everything is fixed, and I got to rant a little bit about fixing other people's attempts, but at least I know both parties should be happy now that everything is working just like it should be. Another reason why the recoil may have broken was because of wear and tear, and that's because it's meant to fail in only a few years. I really do believe they want you to buy a new pressure washer every few years, otherwise they would have made the components out of something better than cheap plastic. So my question is, would you have bought the correct recoil cover for the pressure washer, or would you do what I did, which was to buy a recoil that just works? Now, just to make it clear, I couldn't even find the OEM part, otherwise I would have considered buying it instead of buying a cheap aftermarket one. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.